Stop right there. Employee lane is badged personnel only, ID for scanning. Now.
I am badged. Level 1 agency access, Elena Ross, Chief Legal Counsel.
I don't know you. That card's not enough. Driver's license or...
Officer Kyle Vance was 28 years old and had been with the Metropolitan Police Department for just under 4 years when he made a decision that would cost the taxpayers $4.8 million. He was young, physically imposing, and possessed a rigid interpretation of the law that left zero room for discretion or common sense. To Vance, the badge on his chest wasn't a symbol of service. It was a permit to be right always. On a bright Tuesday morning in October, he was stationed at the security checkpoint of the erratic and bustling Metro Justice Center. It was a post he considered beneath him a babysitting gig, for rookies or retirees, not for a street cop who fancied himself a crusader against crime. But due to a staffing shortage, Vance was pulled from patrol to cover the main lobby. He stood by the metal detectors, jaw set, eyes scanning the morning crowd with a mixture of boredom and hostility. He was looking for a problem to solve, and when you look hard enough for trouble, you inevitably create it. The Justice Center is the heartbeat of the city's legal system. It houses the criminal courts, the district attorney's office, and the administrative headquarters for the police department itself. It is a massive brutalist structure of concrete and glass, its lobby a cavernous space of echoing footsteps and high tension. Lawyers, defendants, clerks, and police officers mix in a daily dance of bureaucracy. At 8:45 a.m., the line for the public metal detectors stretched out the revolving doors. To the right of the public line was the employee and official business lane, a bypass intended for judges, attorneys, and badged staff to enter without the slow strip search of the public queue. Vance had been instructed on the protocol: check for valid employee identification, verify the hologram, and wave them through. It was a simple task. But Kyle Vance had a history of complicating simple tasks. In his 4 years, he had racked up 6 complaints for discourtesy and unprofessional conduct. His supervisors had noted in his file that he struggled with perceived challenges to his authority. If a citizen asked why, Vance heard defiance. If a civilian quoted policy, Vance heard rebellion. He had yet to face any real disciplinary action because, in the eyes of his union rep, he was proactive. But that proactivity was a ticking time bomb. And on this particular Tuesday, the timer hit 0. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If stories about holding power accountable matter to you, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring these truths to light. The lobby was loud. The humidity of the morning clung to the people coming in from the street. Vance was already irritated. He had just argued with a courier about the size of his package, and his patience was fraying. He wanted to assert control. He wanted to remind everyone in that lobby that he was the gatekeeper. It was in this headspace that he saw a woman approach the employee lane. She walked with purpose, bypassing the 50 people waiting in the general line. She didn't look at him. She looked at the turnstile, expecting to pass through, as she did every single day. Vance stepped into her path, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. In his mind, she was cutting the line. In his mind, she needed to be taught a lesson in procedure. He didn't know who she was. He didn't care. All he saw was a black woman in a nice suit who looked like she had somewhere important to be, and Kyle Vance decided that he would be the one to decide if she got there. Elena Ross was 54 years old and had spent the last 25 of them navigating the complexities of the legal system. She was not merely a lawyer, she was an institution. As the chief legal counsel for the Metropolitan Police Agency, she was the highest-ranking civilian official in the department. She answered only to the police chief and the city mayor. She was the woman who drafted the use of force policies, she was the one who negotiated union contracts, and ironically, she was the author of the very security protocols governing the building she was currently trying to enter. Elena was a woman of precision. She wore a charcoal-tailored suit, a silk blouse, and carried a leather briefcase that contained sensitive budget documents for a 9:00 a.m. meeting with the chief of police. She had parked in the underground garage as usual, but the elevators in the secure parking levels were undergoing emergency maintenance, forcing all executive staff to enter through the street-level lobby. It was a minor inconvenience, but Elena was a pragmatist. She adjusted her schedule, walked around the block, and entered the main doors at 8:50 a.m., cutting it close for her meeting. She approached the employee lane, her agency credentials, a gold chip smart card with the city seal already in her hand. She was calm-focused and mentally rehearsing her presentation on liability insurance caps. She had walked through security checkpoints thousands of times. She expected a nod, a beep of the card reader, and a brisk walk to the executive elevator. What she did not expect was a uniformed arm blocking her path. "Excuse me." Elena said, her voice a practiced contralto, smooth and authoritative. She held up her badge. "I'm heading up to the 14th floor." Officer Vance didn't look at the badge. He looked at her face. "Employee lane is for badged personnel only. Public line is to the left." Elena didn't blink. She held the badge higher, right at his eye level. "I am badged personnel officer. This is a level 1 agency access card. I'm Elena Ross, Chief Legal Counsel." Vance looked at the card, then back at her. To him, she didn't look like a chief of anything. His bias, conscious or otherwise, filled in the blanks. He saw a civilian trying to talk her way out of a wait. "I don't know you," Vance said, his voice carrying over the low hum of the lobby. "And that badge looks a little worn. I need to scan your driver's license." Elena paused. The request was irregular. The employee bypass was designed specifically to avoid the intrusive data collection of the visitor management system. "Officer, my agency credentials are sufficient. They are issued by the department. You can verify the hologram. I don't need to be scanned into the visitor system because I am not a visitor. I work here." "I have orders," Vance lied, puffing out his chest. "All unverified persons need to have a government-issued ID scanned. Driver's license, now." Elena felt a prickle of irritation, but she suppressed it. She checked her watch. 8:52 a.m. "Officer scanning my personal driver's license into a third-party vendor system violates the Data Privacy Act of 2021. A policy, I might add, that I wrote. My badge scans at the turnstile. That validates my employment. Please step aside so I can get to my meeting." Vance's face reddened. He wasn't listening to the logic. He was hearing a challenge. A black woman, was quoting policy to him in a public lobby. "I'm not going to ask you again," Vance said, his hand dropping to his handcuffs case. "Hand over your ID or get in the back of the public line." The confrontation had begun to draw attention. The morning rush in a government building is usually a symphony of ignored interactions, people looking at their phones, rushing to court, avoiding eye contact. But the raised voice of a police officer acts like a magnet for attention. Heads turned. Lawyers in the public line lowered their newspapers. A few younger people near the entrance instinctively reached for their smartphones. Elena Ross remained perfectly still. She knew exactly what was happening. She had reviewed hundreds of cases involving officers like Kyle Vance men who confused escalation with control. She knew that any movement she made could be interpreted as aggression, so she kept her hands visible, her posture relaxed but firm. "Officer," Elena said, her tone dropping an octave, becoming slower, more deliberate. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are currently impeding a senior department official. I am refusing to provide my driver's license because you have no legal basis to demand it for building entry when I have provided valid agency credentials. If you are unsure of my identity, pick up your radio and call the watch commander. Ask for Captain Miller. He is expecting me." Vance scoffed. The suggestion that he needed to call his boss to handle a disruptive female was insulting. "I don't need to call anyone to do my job. You're refusing a lawful order." "It is not a lawful order," Elena corrected. "It is an arbitrary demand based on your failure to recognize standard credentials. I am offering you a solution. Call the captain. Verify the badge. Do not escalate this." "You don't tell me what to do." Vance stepped closer, invading her personal space. This is a classic intimidation tactic designed to provoke a reaction. If she stepped back, she was fleeing. If she stepped forward, she was assaulting an officer. Elena stood her ground, anchoring her heels into the marble floor. "I am giving you a lawful notification," Vance barked, playing to the crowd, now trying to show he was the one in charge. "Produce your ID for scanning, or you will be detained for trespassing and obstruction of governmental administration." "I am the government administration," Elena said dryly. "And I am telling you, you are making a mistake that you cannot undo." Vance saw the phones pointing at him. He saw the smirks on the faces of some of the defense attorneys in the line who recognized the absurdity of the situation even if they didn't recognize Elena. He felt the cornered animal instinct that bad officers often mistake for courage. He couldn't back down now. If he let her pass, he lost. In his mind, enforcing his will was more important than enforcing the law. "Last chance," Vance said, unsnapping the retention strap on his handcuff case. "ID or cuffs?" "I have provided ID," Elena said, gesturing to the gold badge still held clearly in her hand. "I am declining your request for my private data. I am going to walk to that turnstile now." She took one step. Just one slow, deliberate step toward the employee gate. Vance moved with the aggressive speed of someone who had been waiting for a reason to get physical. As Elena took that single step toward the turnstile, Vance lunged. He didn't block her. He grabbed her. His hand clamped onto her left wrist, the one holding her briefcase, and he wrenched it upward. "That's it! You're done!" Vance shouted. The briefcase dropped to the marble floor with a heavy thud, papers rustling inside. The sound echoed through the silent lobby. "Officer, unhand me," Elena said. Her voice was no longer a request. It was a command. It was the voice she used when cross-examining a hostile witness, a voice that could freeze a courtroom. "You are assaulting a federal-level employee. Stop resisting," Vance yelled, reciting the script he had been trained to use to cover his liability. He spun her around, forcing her chest against the cold metal of the turnstile. "I am not resisting," Elena stated clearly, looking directly into the lens of a smartphone being held by a young man in a hoodie 10 feet away. "I am complying with your physical force, but I am under duress. Witnesses, please note I am not resisting." Vance kicked her legs apart. "Spread 'em! Hands behind your back!" The crowd was murmuring now. "Hey man, she showed you her badge," someone shouted from the back of the line. "She's wearing a suit, dude, she works here," yelled another. Vance ignored them. He was in the tunnel now. The adrenaline was dumping into his system, drowning out reason. He grabbed Elena's right arm and pulled it forcefully behind her back, cranking the shoulder joint to a painful angle. Elena winced a sharp intake of breath through her nose, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a scream. She had birthed 2 children and survived breast cancer. A 28-year-old bully twisting her arm was not going to break her composure. "You are arresting me for trespassing in my own building," Elena said, her face pressed against the turnstile. "Do you understand the magnitude of this error? You're under arrest for obstruction and trespassing," Vance panted, struggling to get the cuffs on her wrists, not because she was fighting, but because his own hands were shaking with adrenaline. He finally snapped the ratchets shut. Click, click. He tightened them. Too tight. "Check the fit," Elena said. "That is policy." "They fit fine," Vance sneered. He grabbed her by the bicep and hauled her upright. Her blazer was bunched up, her hair slightly askew, but her dignity remained untouched. She looked him dead in the eye. "Officer, my name is Elena Ross. My badge number is Executive 004. You have just arrested the Chief Legal Counsel. I want you to remember this moment." Vance laughed. A short, nervous, arrogant laugh. "Yeah, and I'm the police commissioner. Let's go." "So..." Have you ever seen an authority figure so blinded by ego they couldn't see the cliff they were walking off? Drop a comment below on whether you think police departments need stricter psychological screenings. Vance marched her through the lobby, parading his capture past the very people Elena worked with daily. He didn't take her to the private security office. He decided to walk her out the front doors to his patrol car parked at the curb, intending to drive her 2 blocks to the central precinct for booking. He wanted the spectacle. He wanted to show the public that nobody is above the law, failing to realize that he was the one breaking it. As he pushed her into the back of his cruiser, he failed to secure her seatbelt, another policy violation. Elena noted it mentally. She was building the file in her head. Every second of this encounter was being cataloged, cross-referenced with statutes, and prepared for litigation. The drive to the precinct was short, less than 3 minutes. Vance sat in the front, typing on his computer terminal, likely entering the initial arrest codes. He felt powerful. He had taken down a belligerent woman who thought she was special. He turned on his body camera only after he got into the car, a convenient lapse in protocol that he would later claim was a technical malfunction, unaware that the lobby cameras and bystander cell phones had captured everything. They arrived at the central precinct Sally Port. Vance pulled Elena out of the car. Her wrists were throbbing. The circulation was being cut off, but she remained silent. She walked with her head high, flanked by the officer who was practically vibrating with self-righteous energy. They entered the booking area. It was a familiar smell to Elena, stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and anxiety. The booking sergeant was busy with a drunk and disorderly, so Vance shoved Elena onto a holding bench. "Sit. Don't move." He walked over to the desk, grabbing a clipboard. He began filling out the arrest form. Suspect, name, Jane Doe, refused ID. Charges: obstruction of Gov't admin, trespassing, resisting arrest. The door to the watch commander's office opened. Captain Miller walked out. Miller was 62, a man with white hair, a thick mustache, and 30 years on the job. He was old police. He believed in chain of command. He believed in respect, and he had a standing appointment every Tuesday at 9:00 a.m. with the chief legal counsel to discuss liability cases. He was currently wondering why she was 10 minutes late. Miller looked at the booking desk. He saw Vance scribbling furiously. Then he looked at the bench. He stopped. He squinted. He took 2 steps forward, his brain refusing to process the visual information. "Elena?" Miller asked, his voice confused. Elena looked up. "Good morning, Captain Miller. I apologize for my tardiness. I appear to be detained." The silence that fell over the booking room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Captain Miller looked at the handcuffs on Elena's wrists. He looked at the bruised skin around them. Then he looked at Officer Vance, who was still writing, oblivious to the temperature change in the room. "Vance!" Miller barked. It wasn't a shout. It was a detonation. Vance jumped, dropping his pen. "Yes, Captain, just processing a trespasser from the Justice Center. Refused ID, became belligerent." Belligerent. Miller walked around the desk, closing the distance to Vance in 3 long strides. "You arrested a trespasser." "Yes, sir. She tried to bypass security, refused to scan her license." "Vance?" Miller said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Do you know who that is?" Vance looked at Elena, then back at the captain. Doubt began to creep into his eyes for the first time. She claimed to be legal counsel or something, but she refused to show a valid ID, so She is the chief legal counsel for this entire agency," Miller said, enunciating every syllable. "She signs the checks for the lawsuits we lose. She wrote the manual you are supposed to have read. She is the civilian overseer of this department." Vance's face went pale. The blood drained out of him so fast he looked like he might faint. She didn't. The badge looked. Unlock her. Now. Vance fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the key into the slot. Give me the keys. Miller snapped, snatching them from Vance's hand. The captain knelt down, an unprecedented gesture of deference, and unlocked the cuffs himself. Elena, I don't even know what to say, Miller stammered as the cuffs clicked open. Elena rubbed her wrists. Deep red grooves marred her skin. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. She looked at Vance, who was shrinking into the corner. Captain Miller, Elena said, her voice cool and steady. Please secure the footage from the lobby immediately. Also, I would like this officer's badge and firearm surrendered to you pending the investigation. I am formally pressing charges for false arrest and assault. Vance, Miller said, not looking away from Elena. Gun and shield. On the desk. You're done for the day. Captain, I was just following procedure. Vance tried, his voice cracking. You arrested the boss, son, Miller said. You didn't follow procedure. You followed your ego. Badge, gun, now. The unraveling of Officer Kyle Vance was swift, brutal, and public. Within an hour, the body camera footage, which had buffered the pre-event recording despite Vance's late activation, and the building security tapes were on the chief of police's desk. The video was damning. It showed a calm, professional woman presenting valid credentials. It showed an officer escalating a non-event. It showed the physical aggression, the twisting of the arm, the unnecessary force. But what sealed Vance's fate wasn't just the arrest. It was the lies. In his initial report, which he had partially completed in the car, he wrote that the suspect swung her bag at the officer and attempted to flee. The video showed clearly that her bag was ripped from her hand, and she never took a step away from him. Elena Ross went to the hospital to document her injuries, a sprained rotator cuff and nerve damage in her right wrist. She returned to work the next day, her arm in a sling, and sat at the head of the conference table. The investigation didn't take months. It took weeks. The blue wall of silence that usually protects officers crumbled immediately. No one was going to stick their neck out for a guy who arrested the woman who defended them in court. The irony was palpable. The very legal team that usually worked to minimize settlements for the city was now recused, and outside counsel had to be hired to defend the city against its own chief counsel. Vance was placed on unpaid suspension. He tried to rally support on social media, posting vague statuses about political persecution and doing the job nobody else wants to do. But the video leaked. The internet is a cruel judge. The footage of him twisting the arm of a grandmotherly figure in a business suit went viral. The comments were not on his side. Officer threatens arrest over ID scan. Black woman is agency legal counsel. The headline wrote itself. The department moved to terminate Vance. He fought it, of course. He demanded an arbitration hearing. He claimed he made a good faith error. At the hearing, Elena took the stand. She didn't raise her voice. She simply walked the arbitrator through the law. Officer Vance was not enforcing the law, she testified. He was enforcing his fragile sense of self-importance. He ignored my credentials not because they were invalid, but because they challenged his dominance. A police officer who cannot distinguish between a threat and a colleague, between a criminal and a citizen asserting their rights, is a liability this city cannot afford. The city settled with Elena Ross for $4.8 million. It was one of the largest individual settlements for a wrongful arrest in the department's history. The figure was high not just because of the assault, but because the city knew that if Elena took this to a jury, she would destroy them. She knew where all the skeletons were buried because she was the one who usually kept the graveyard locked. Officer Kyle Vance was terminated. His certification was revoked by the state board, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. He didn't just lose his job, he lost his career. He was 28 with a permanent mark on his record that would follow him to every job interview for the rest of his life. But the money and the firing were just the mechanics of justice. The real story was the silence that followed. Elena Ross eventually retired. She used a portion of her settlement to start a legal defense fund for citizens who couldn't afford to fight wrongful arrests. She often spoke about that Tuesday morning. She spoke about the cold metal of the turnstile against her cheek and the realization that her title, her education, and her suit were no protection against the raw, unchecked power of a biased officer. If it could happen to her, the chief legal counsel inside the very building where justice is supposed to be administered, what chance does the average citizen have? Vance's mistake wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a failure of character. He had forgotten that the badge is a heavy weight, not a weapon. He had forgotten that authority is borrowed from the public and it can be revoked. As we close this file, take a moment to look around your own community. How many interactions happen every day where someone demands compliance, not because it's right, but because they can? How many careers are destroyed? How many lives are traumatized? Because one person decided their ego was more important than the law, justice was served in this case, but only because the victim had the power to demand it. True justice will be when we don't need a chief legal counsel to get a badge number, but when the badge itself guarantees respect for the rights of the people. What do you think? Should officers be personally liable for settlements when they violate clear policies? Or is this just the cost of doing business in a complex world? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in holding power accountable, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay safe, stay informed, and always know your rights.